No, I'm actually quite delighted to be here. I often find myself facing an audience of very like-minded people from the renewable sector, and my colleagues in the industry, Tabi and Niveshen and Wezi and Bernard. But today has actually been really enlightening because it's been a long time since I've been to a conference where, you know, it kicked off with people saying coal is good in the future, and that sort of woke me up. And, you know, so it's been a really interesting dynamic today, and I've been really glad to be here and to see how the narrative has evolved over the last 6 hours, 5 hours, not sure. But, you know, and seeing the contestation, and even today with the Climate Act being put into, well, being signed by the president, I mean, this is going to lead, it's another step in a fundamental transition that is happening in our economy at the moment. Just to introduce myself, I'm Frank Spencer. I work for a renewables project development house called Cainmani. I'm also on the board of the PV Industry Association, where I'm also recently re-elected as the spokesperson. And just delighted to be here today to talk about closing out the session about where renewables is maybe going to be play in our future. And now, if you suit Bernard, I will sit down now. I've not well briefed my panelists, and they've been a bit nervous about that because, you know, it's been a session where we've been asking some controversial questions, and Bernard has poked a lot of people. So I think a few people here might be scared that I might follow on in that line, but we will see. But what I'd like to do is just quickly, for my panelists, just to introduce themselves, Tabi starting with you, but also to define for you, well, what energy transition means for you. If you can answer that question while you introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Moderator. I was here exactly last year, and we were at exactly the same time slot. So hopefully, next year we'll get an earlier slot so that we're able to get ear of a lot of people. My name is Rethabile Melamu. I am the CEO of the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association. I think for me, just transition or transition. Energy transition.
You can add just.
Let me leave just because it's contentious. I think an energy transition is a transition that ensures that everyone in this country is brought along. That by transitioning, we do not exacerbate energy inequality, and that the poorest of the people in this country are not worse off than they are before the transition. So yes, it's about incorporation and increased deployment of renewable energy sources. As a country, we are blessed with ample resources, but I think it would be a disservice if we leave a lot of people which are the majority of citizens in this country behind as we transition. So I think an energy transition is an inclusive transition. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Frank. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Niveshen Govender. I am the CEO of the South African Wind Energy Association, representing the united voice of the wind sector here in South Africa. For me, Frank, the energy transition is really moving us as a country from a high carbon intensive energy system to a low carbon intensive energy system, and then using a network of technologies that will allow us to get there and reduce our carbon footprint. If you bring the just aspect into the transition, I think it's a lot more complex of a solution to be implemented throughout the country. Here you're talking about people and the inclusion of people, the livelihoods of South Africans, and how we see the economy growing through job creation, through skills transfer, through wealth differences, through inequality, through energy poverty, and all of these aspects coming in to have a more cumbersome plan of how you're going to approach this transition, which is inevitable. If you look at where the globe is going, we have to ensure the sustainability of our communities, of people of the globe, to ensure that we can move forward.
Wezi.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wezi Gondwe. I head up business development at Africa GreenCo. We are a regional business based with operations in 4 countries, Zambia, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa being the latest market of entry. We are a credit-worthy renewable energy aggregator and trader, and we're also a member of the Southern African Power Pool. To us, and the energy transition, I think, entails, and as is inherent in the technologies that are now coming to the fore to, substitute and replace, older core-based technologies. We're moving from, a somewhat passive, management or relatively passive management of our systems to a more active management of our systems. It also means then that the rate of innovation, not just in generation and storage technology, but in the management of our grids. What does energy mean? Moving beyond the conventional and thinking more in terms of what is the financial value, of energy, of storing energy, and the interrelation between consumers and service providers, and moving away from that single model, or what we call the single buyer model. And then lastly, it's really broadening our horizons to, beyond the national borders of each of our markets in the region, to really think more comprehensively about what, energy security, is, what that entails for the future. And we believe that's going to have, a lot of that is going to be answered by the ability to trade energy, across the region. Thank you.
Bernard.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bernard Magoro. I'm the head of the IPP office. So for me, and I agree with what all the other speakers said, by the way, but I think the two important criteria for transition for me, one is what Tabi mentioned. There is no transition if people on the ground are going to be left behind. And we know that South Africa, we've got a serious socio-economic challenges in the country. And any transition, and we have done this even in the REAP program, has to take people on board. If you don't have economic development and socio-economic development objectives in this transition, then we're going to have a serious problem going forward. So that aspect needs to be the backbone of whatever transition route we take. And then the second one is energy security. And I'm glad that we are now starting to talk together coal, gas, and renewables. For my sins, I spent 20 years of my life managing the grid. And energy security it's something that we can't take for granted. And I think there's a lot of talk now that, leave the coal behind and let's transition into renewables. The fact of the matter is we cannot, and that's a fact, we cannot just jump from one technology to the other. And that's why we call it a transition. So energy transition has to incorporate energy security. And I think to challenge the engineers in the room, we have lost the space to voice out that aspect of energy security. Yes, we've got markets coming up, but there is no talk about ensuring that as we transition, energy security is in the forefront of that transition. We've had a very painful years of load shedding, and I think let's take the lessons from there and make sure that the transition is managed in the right manner that does not compromise energy security or create energy poverty.
Thanks. And I think we'll come back to the topic of energy security. But just on the back of not leaving people behind and looking at South Africa as a developing economy, it was proposed right at the beginning that perhaps coal is the best power source for a developing economy. How would you respond to that? And I'll let each of the panelists jump in as you feel led. And if you're not quick, I'm going to pick on one of you. Tavi, you look like you want to say something.
I see all the gentlemen looking at me, ladies first. as a country, I think I indicated that we are blessed with a lot different resources. And I think we need to make sure that we utilize and harness and deploy technologies that exploit those resources, right? So we always, as a South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, talk about a symphony of technologies. But maybe let me zoom into solar PV as an example. We call it one of the most democratic technologies you'll find globally. And that's because you can deploy it at different scales. You can deploy it just for the purposes of charging the battery or keeping the lights on. About a couple of months ago, I visited my family in Sebokeng in an established neighborhood. That was established over 10 years ago. And that neighborhood did not have access to the grid. And they had not had access for well over 10 years. But I think what was sobering for me was to witness the extent to which they deployed solar PV and battery technologies. I saw batteries that I'd never seen before in some of the households that I visited. So I think solar PV specifically is scalable. You can deploy it at household level all the way to utility scale. You know, we have one of the best resources in the country. And as we deploy wind, more storage, or still anchor our economy around coal, I think we need not lose sight on the potential that this renewable energy technology bring to our economy. But we're also very much aware of the looming export taxes or import taxes into Europe, and the need for our exporting industries to ensure that they remain competitive. And for them to remain competitive, they need to deploy or increase the renewable energy component to their energy mix. So I think, Frank, to your point, I believe there is space for everyone. But I think in this case, solar PV presents a fantastic opportunity for the country, from the rich to the poor. And I do think that as a country, we need to take an opportunity, you need advantage of the opportunity that it presents. And we've already seen the extent to which it's been deployed, but we are barely scratching the surface.
No, thanks, Tabi, and I think that is, certainly we see that across Africa as well, right, from the micro to the macro scale, the deployment of solar to provide energy services. Nivesh, maybe to ask you, is wind quite as democratic then, or what role does wind play in the broader mix?
Yeah, so from we, as the association, we're well aware of the limitations of the technology. And one of the limitations is the scalability in terms of having it on a small scale. Wind projects are typically utility scale projects, and they are typically very far away from anything in terms of wind-rich areas. I think the best opportunity within building wind projects is community development. So reaching those communities that don't have access, one, to energy, two, to opportunities within the energy sector. So I think if you look at the energy sector holistically, Frank, no one has won the battle of how to be socially responsible in terms of inclusion, especially in terms of ownership. So when you look at energy ownership sits here in capital cities, sits here in global players. There are no models that have been tried and tested in terms of how you include community ownership into these projects that are successful and sustainable, and gives people a fair opportunity to invest in these projects and take away a return on those projects. You heard the financiers in the round before us talking about how thin and how slim these margins are. If you look at these BEE businesses or black-owned businesses, South African businesses holistically, they're struggling to not just participate, but to upskill themselves, to scale themselves, to have the business acumen, to have the financial acumen, to have the skills transfer, to understand the technology trends that are changing, to keep up with what's happening. Now we're expecting communities who have never interacted with the energy market to participate meaningfully and have a space in it. So from my perspective, we've not won that battle as South Africa holistically, and I think we should all own that. I think renewable energy is starting to give that back. From a renewable energy IPP procurement program perspective, there are now requirements in these projects that requires community ownership in terms of community trusts that are invested into these projects. There are requirements in terms of SED spend, educational spend, infrastructure build that needs to happen within these communities to make sure that there's some benefit going on. There's also now requirements in terms of local participation of the labor force that is being used on these farms, whether through construction or through O&M. So from a wind perspective, we are very cognizant of that fact. We also are very proud that through the last 13 years of this REAP program, or the public procurement program, we've committed or we've targeted to reach 40% of local content. As the wind sector, we've reached 47%. If you benchmark this to more established industries in the country, and I like picking on the automotive industry particularly, if you benchmark us, we've achieved a lot more, a lot quicker for the small part of the market that we have. I think in closing on this topic, for me it is that we have achieved, we continue to provide benefit, not just from an energy perspective and an energy mix perspective or cost perspective of energy, but also on the social imperatives of the country. If I look at a study recently conducted by Sanedi and EWCETA, you will see that renewable energy accounts for 6% of the energy mix, whereas the workforce is 9% of the entire energy workforce, showing what renewable energy can actually implement in terms of job creation.
So that's super exciting. I'm glad you touched on that in terms of the job creation and what's happened to date. But I'd like to also look to the future. And Bernard, you've overseen a lot of this very successful public procurement through REAP, the delivery of quite a lot of solar and wind to the grid. And yet, in the last couple of years, it seems that the private sector is starting to eclipse public procurement. And that perhaps, rough figures, we have about 8 gigawatts of solar built at all scale, of which 2/3 approximately has been built by the private sector. And likewise, where's my figures, around 5.5 gigawatts of wind, of which about 1/3, maybe 2/5 has been built by the private sector. Where do you see public procurement going? What is the future for public procurement when you've got, in some senses, the tsunami of private sector projects coming?
I don't think the discussion is about private and public. We're all tackling the same problem. We have a serious energy deficit in the country. And whether that's built for private bilateral arrangement or is built for public, like what we procure, I think we're still solving the same problem. And you'll find even in other advanced market, developed world, you hardly get rid of central procurement because there has to be an energy security mandate somewhere that says in case of market failure, which we have seen all over the world, we need to close that gap. And I think that is a fact we saw in Europe now with the energy crisis in 2022 and 2023, that became the reality. There are countries that are paying capacity charge for gas plants, coal plants, just to remain there to ensure that, in case the sun is not shining, in case there's a problem, we need to call on these resources. So it's not a public versus private discussion. It's about creating an energy security for the country. So, and I think we need to really continue with this debate. Yes, there is a stampede now because the grid is limited. But had it not been for the grid, we all need capacity, and we need it as fast as possible to solve South Africa Inc. And that's the view from government. that we need to work together. These markets, me and my friend here will continue to operate in parallel, just to answer your question directly. We'll continue to operate in parallel because he's not going to sell energy to my grandmother in Venda. So the government must make sure that energy still gets to the rural of the rural. And not only that, even there's puzzle shops in Soweto and everywhere else. So please, let's get this message right. It's not about one or the other. We will need to solve the energy crisis together, public and private initiatives working hand in hand. So public procurement will continue for the next several years until there is enough liquidity in the market for the market to function efficiently.
So we'll come to the sort of market evolution in a second, but just again, I want to drill a little bit more on the public-private contestation, because you make it sound like we're all very friendly, but in reality, like you've just said, the grid is contested, right? And we've seen Eskom proposing to reserve grid for the public sector, and this was after Eskom accused the private sector of hogging the grid. It looks like now the public sector wants to hog the grid. Maybe you can just comment on the grid challenges and how do we solve them? How do we get to a point where actually we're not fighting over grid between public and private?
How long do we have? But
well, I need to let my other panelists speak, so you have 2 minutes.
I'll be brief. I think the grid challenge, remember it started with bid window 6, and I'll try and be brief. Since then, we've been engaging, and IPP office has been leading this conversation with Eskom. ICA came out of that whole discussion that took us almost the whole of 2023. So the issue we thought we were solving at the time was about project readiness, right? ICA was developed to make sure that we test project readiness and everyone is,
Sorry, Bernard, if you can just explain what e-car or IG-car is for, again, our audience is not our normal audience.
Apologies.
For the miners, explain for the miners.
Sorry, Bernard. So, yeah, ICA, these are the interim rules for grid allocation. So we had agreed, perhaps the real grid stampede happened in November 2022 when we were evaluating bid window 5. And by the time we started, in fact, when we started evaluation, we asked Eskom, so how much grid is available? And they say 5 gigawatt, 5.1 gigawatt has been taken up by private sector. And by the way, that's where hogging is happening, because we have not seen much from that 5 gigawatt that disappeared during that time. Projects are starting to close now, which is good, but there is still a lot of grid that is sitting in with developers that has not been utilized in 2 years now. So that's ICA. Those are the rules that we developed now to try and make the process to allocate the grid more fair and looking at the projects that are ready. So all it tries to do is, instead of Bernard, I'll use myself, applying for grid connection, and because I was first, then I get allocated the grid. Now there is a checklist that they go through and say, do you have environmental? Do you have a client? And even with that, what we realize that is still not a solution. We know for a fact that people are going, with a full checklist, and then they still sit with the grid for a couple of months or even not years. So now the next step is to say, we need to solve this in such a way that it's not about private or public, but it's really about grid hogging. Because ICA still does not solve grid hogging. I can see to the grid for 12 months being allocated with the ICA rules. So that's where I think the next conversation should be. How do we make sure that if you get the grid today, you start project execution tomorrow? It's not private versus public. We're all targeting the same developers.
Yep, cool.
It's the same developers on both.
Wezi, turning to you as a sort of representative of the private sector then, Bernard has defended the mix between public and private, and yet we know that project developers, last year Eskom ran a survey and presented the fact that there was 66 gigawatts of renewables under development. We're probably over 100 gigawatts, and we'll see Eskom's run the same survey recently, and the results will come out. I mean, that's a lot of projects being queued up to be built. Maybe if you could just talk from a private sector, we would love to build 100 gigawatts, How fast can the private sector build that? How do we build it? what would the challenges be? How do we bring it to market? It's quite a broad question, but maybe if you could speak to that from a private voice.
No, thanks. And, that, in a sense, that is the central question to really unlocking, the delivery of, and maximizing the delivery and acceleration of megawatts, down the years. And I just want to, just reaffirm and confirm with, and agree with Bernard's point, it is a partnership, it's a collaboration. The convener of all the players in the market is the regulator. You need to have an updated rules-based system that applies equally to all market participants, okay? And that becomes more obvious now with the trading arm under the National Transmission Company of Eskom moving there, or with the entire market being arbitered by an independent market and system operator. I think the era is, looking to, a framework that provides for, unbiased, access to the grid. So really what we're talking about here is an enhanced rules-based system that can evaluate projects based on their readiness, their ability to raise capital and financing. And we have to be careful here because, at the moment, as an IPP looking to wield power over the grid and deliver it to a customer or a trader, you basically have to go through a certain kind of like vicious loop. I think, as players in the market, everyone knows the chicken and egg loop between getting your contracts and getting your permitting and getting your and all of that. But I think when we move towards, structure such as a national market that basically creates a competitive market, a pool, and the efficient design of that is really going to be key. That generators and traders can sell into, and consumers and traders can also buy from to supply to loads. With that central trader under the regulation of the ISMO, really managing the efficient allocation of, or dictating the efficient allocation of capitals through an efficient market that provides for price discovery and gives an indication and a price signal of future demand and requirements. Because right now, disparate projects running around, and the market sometimes, and lenders and investors, not really sure about how the market of tomorrow is going to look like. What do the rules look like? How safe is my investment? And how do I manage, kind of like competing and conflicting requirements in the market with the need to provide long tenors to IPPs, for example, 20, 25 years to get their projects bankable, versus consumers who are only prepared to sign up 5, maybe 7 years. So those are huge issues that an efficiently designed central market serving both supply and demand is going to address and should address. That really then becomes, I think, for me, and in our position as an aggregator and a trader, that really becomes the key that unlocks that. Because even with deployed capacity, dealing with curtailment, for example, all those are costs that go back into the development when being conservative and trying to factor that in, and that only pushes up the cost when you think about reserving or kind of contingent capital to account for all of that. But when you have a market that can mop up all of that, monetize it, et cetera, all of that starts leading to better priced, more competitively priced project, more bankable projects. Banks are going to look at that central market. That's going to be the one bankable central feature to say, is there an efficient energy exchange with clear settlement rules, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's going to drive bankability and accelerate the onboarding of projects.
So that wholesale market that's being proposed for South Africa, I mean, I think we're talking sort of 2028 in terms of starting to implement. Let's say we get it right and it does bring on really, really like low cost energy and the ability to trade and move electrons around dynamically. What is that impact going to be on Eskom generation? Again, Wezi, maybe your view from the private sector. I mean, is it going to kill Eskom's coal? or just because they won't be able to play affordably in that market, or how do we bring Eskom generation into that wholesale market, the existing fleet?
I don't think that in itself necessarily translates or spells the death of Eskom coal. As a system, you still need a baseload generation to balance and support all your variable renewables. So yes, battery storage is going to come in and become important. The national and international markets are going to become important. It's going to be very interesting to see what kind of linkage then will exist or may exist between the national market and the regional markets, SAP, for example. But it doesn't necessarily spell the end of coal. The key thing to solve for, actually, long term, is not how much renewables we can bring, but how much baseload. We need to bring on and substitute coal in the mix. So, again, another aspect of the market is, when you're looking at an independent market and system operator, and you're looking at cost, okay, if you adopt, a merit order dispatch system, okay, your cheaper energy gets into the grid first. But somebody is still going to have, as you said, it's not just security of supply, but security of the grid. Somebody is still going to have to perform the central function of coordinating grid sustainability, holding reserves, and that cost is going to have to be borne by somebody. So whether that's all the generators contributing some kind of reserving cost into a pool, of some kind, or those reserving and ancillary grid services being farmed out to IPPs to hold, for example, standby capacity. All those issues will have to be sorted. But the central point is there will be a cost allocated to it for the deployment of the right type of technology to support the grid and ensure it is run sustainably, safely. The crux is the transparency and acceptability of that cost to the market.
So Wezi, you raised a lot of terms there around like balancing and ancillary services and all these little nuances that are going to come to play in the market. But you also spoke about the need to be able to meet baseload. And maybe I can turn this question to Tavi and ask, can Renewables+Storage do what gas and coal do? And in terms of all of those services, or the majority of those services, or how do you see the technology evolving in terms of renewables providing those sort of ancillary services we typically see from traditional baseload plant?
Yeah. One of the key thematic areas that's under discussion globally around renewable energy technologies in general at the Global Solar Renewable Energy Alliance is co-location of these technologies, right? So one of the suggestions or proposals that as the renewable energy sectors have provided to DMRE is that do consider the co-location of wind, solar, and storage, because it helps address the variability on the one hand, but it also makes the best use of the resources. So when it's not, when there is wind, and there is over production of wind, you're able to store it. And so I think the technology, Frank, is moving in the direction where the combination of various renewable technology and storage are increasingly going to provide some sort of base load. But at this stage in our development in the country, we don't have the luxury of choosing one or the other. It will be many, many years until we get to a point where I believe the renewable energy technologies and storage will sustain the economic growth. And I believe that the only reason why we don't have load shedding currently, or we don't even feel the challenge or the depth of the challenge is because the economy is not growing. The minute the economy grows even at 2% or 3%, we'll realize that we are in a position where we need all the different resources that we have. And so I do believe that we will get to a point where renewable energy and storage play a critical role, but we are not there yet. And even in 2028, where we think our market, our electricity market will be liberalized, I don't think it's too early. We heard recently that some of the power plants' life has been extended by Eskom. And if they have assets or generation assets of between 80 to 90%, they control the market, they control the price. And in 2028, nothing much would have happened. 2028 is
Toby,
3 years' time.
You're now eating into Bernard's question time, and he's going to stop you if I don't. So.
I'm trying to be nice to this Dr. Tabi because she's already sulking that
I'm
they,
sulking.
they are so late. You know why you are this time of the day?
No.
There's not a slot later. So now that we've established friendship,
So we can move on, we can go on forever, but others can come
At
in.
least we're here for the drink.
you're standing between the 3 miners left and wine time. So there's a question from Bruce Williamson. And Frank, I'm going to ask you and Wezi perhaps to comment on this. Perhaps. Have panelists engaged with institutional fund managers for equity and debt funding? So we made the initial windows was so lucrative for the banks that we didn't have to go beyond that. That's not true anymore. Are we getting to the point where other conventional funders are playing yet? Frank, can I start with you? And
Sure,
then
yeah. So absolutely, I think certainly in my engagements, in some senses, there's no lack of funding for infrastructure projects. Yes, the returns have to be right. I mean, on the debt front, there is still significant liquidity amongst the traditional banks, even to the point that banks are asking why they're investing in these projects because the margin they're making on their debt is so small, it's so competitive, and so many of the banks want to play. So certainly right now, there's no issue on the debt side. Likewise, on the equity side, in terms of private equity or pension funds or other money, I would argue they're queuing up to invest into these projects. So certainly in my experience, to be blunt, there's no lack of money to build this infrastructure, not today. The challenges lie elsewhere. The challenges lie in closing PPAs, in getting connection to the grid, aligning market expectation with the actual requirements of an IPP. And I think these are all the things like traders and aggregators, and we didn't really talk about traders and aggregators as a stepping stone to the wholesale market, but I think, are looking to solve some of these problems.
Did you want to add to that? You agree?
Totally agree. Not much more to add. I would only say that from a regional perspective, where we launched our model as GreenCo, we actually started the other way around. And in our pilot project in Zambia with our first project, we actually attracted DFI financing to that, potentially a commercial bank coming into the structure now. But we are seeing, as Frank has said, there is no shortage of capital. It's around getting the lenders, financiers comfortable with alternative financing structures.
I personally really absorbed the point Deepak made at the earlier panels. Perhaps the race to the lowest price is not optimum. Perhaps there's a little bit more than just price in all of that. But now I want to offend everybody quickly in the last round of questions so that I can have my wine on my own and you guys don't want to talk to me. So Bernard, there's a question from Bernard.
Which Bernard?
This one. Have we finally achieved a point where Window 1's exorbitant prices are justifiable? So Window 1, yes, we paid a lot. We made billionaires. Is the country better off financially? Is it ever going to be better off thanks to Window 1? Okay, thank you. Okay, then,
Yeah, so I think you're right. Window 1, I mean, those prices are now at R3.70.
R3.70. What a fantastic model.
Inflated.
Not for the country.
If you compare with Window 6, which is 54 cents per, correct. I think that definitely we paid the school fees there, and the only way to deal with that problem is to procure as much as possible so that the average price continues to drop. But I wanted to just comment on the question you asked,
I
Tabi.
like this man. He's now going to ignore my question. I need you to be brief because I want to insult them as well. Okay.
No, just a side comment. The question around renewables and storage. Please, we do have over 400 megawatts under risk mitigation, 150 megawatts already operating today, supplying power from 5 a.m. until 9:30. Pure renewables, PV and battery. We have combination of PV, battery, and wind as well. So please,
That's
we're
what
there.
I should have said.
We are there.
I want to go to my...
Bernard, if I may jump in, just
Yeah.
also, because I think it ties this all together. That I mean, it was mentioned about the massive subsidies that happened in Europe to kickstart the renewables program there. In South Africa, we had a tiny subsidy in the early bid windows, which created all the market certainty for us. And again, the private sector wouldn't be lining up to build 100 gigawatts of renewables if the IPP office hadn't kicked off with a couple of gigawatts. That
You would
were
say
expensive.
so. I mean, some of us who paid the price would say this was state capture, just very structured state capture. So can we move on now, because we will never agree on that. No, I'm deliberately just being difficult. It's late in the day. So
We all want the wine. It's fine.
So I want to ask my sunshine lady and my hot air guy, the wind guy. So when we talk on other conferences, even the OEMs, they actually talk about all the way through to where the minerals that they need for this fantastic gadgets they're going to make are going to come from. You guys just assume it's all going to come from China? Or do you worry about upstream? I'm a miner, so I want to hear you. What part of mining do you need to exist? And do you worry about it, or can that happen in China? Do you only want localization for what? So can we draw the wind turbines all the way through to mining, and then I'm going to ask the same of the solar panels.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Bernard.
You don't mean it, but proceed. Proceed. You've said thank you.
I usually come to this conference to get insulted, so I take my dose earlier.
And you come back, so this
And I
abusive
keep coming
relationship.
back.
Yeah.
No, but thank you for the question. I think, for us, when I started here at SAWEA 3 years ago, my call to action was localization and industrialization attached
All the way
to
through to
localization.
mining.
All the way
You
through
want
to
the
mining.
rare earths to be mined in South Africa.
Absolutely. We have done the research, we have done the work, the homework has been done. We have recently, with the PCC, with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, put out a paper called the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. That is an industrialization plan for renewable energy products, wind, solar PV, and battery storage all included. From a wind perspective, I need to make the statement again that we have beneficiated locally. 47% of our plant is locally produced, right, currently as it stands. Not much of our components come from China, actually. So a lot of the European markets...
But now we're going to ask Dr. Tabi, who can't exist without China.
15 seconds.
Okay, so let me wrap up by saying, yes, it's high on our agenda. Yes, it's a priority. Yes, we're going right down to beneficiation of minerals. Yes, it's been mapped out. Yes, we're looking at plans of how we implement this and how we localize more.
Dr. Tabi, you are the installer on behalf of China.
Yes, we do import some modules from China and maybe inverters, but about 50% of our value chain is localized in South Africa. And in addition,
50%?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
In addition, because the rest of the plant, the balance of plant, most of those activities happen in South Africa. In addition, just to answer your question briefly, is that we commissioned 2 studies. We committed to localization, and these studies sought to understand the localization potential of components along the entire solar PV value chain. So the first study was completed in 2022. And a couple of months ago, in addition to the launch of SAREM, which we were part of, we launched a study that was supported by GIZ. And that study answers the question, so what? So you have identified all these opportunities. How do you then ensure that you can turn the opportunities into reality? Happy to share the second report. The first one, you have to be a member of SAPVIA to access it. But that's the level of commitment. And we've identified a number of minerals that need to go into our value chain and how that ties into the minerals industry. And so we aligned, we committed, we committed about localization as an industry. No. But we think localization has to make sense. So where other countries are already doing well, don't waste your time, resources, and energy in trying to reinvent the wheel.
Not bad for 5:30.
That is modules.
Not bad for 5:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Nice, robust conversations. Thank you very much.